Hello everybody and welcome back to the second video of this month, and we are going to be painting a Sons of Horus Arcus, a Sakaran, but this time I've inverted the scheme, so actually we're going to do a predominantly black tank with some green accents. So I thought this would be a great way to go about talking about kind of how I would go about painting black. I know lots of people ask for kind of a more up-to-date Sons of Horus scheme as well. So this video will cover all those bases. This won't go into every single aspect of this Sakaran, but it certainly will go into most of them. So we're going to start with a black primer. I found the Sakaran a bit of a hassle to gap fill and build. I thought the Kratos is a much easier tank to build. Just because of the way that it connects on kind of edges. But we're going to start off with the black. So we're going to do ice yellow and grim black. Now that might sound unusual, but it's all going to make sense a little bit later. And what I did, I've just used straight up grim black. I've added a little bit of thinner in there and a few drops of ice yellow to give me this kind of grey color. Greeny blue, I think, is the best way to describe it, but I like it, and this is tends to be the combination that I use for all of my Sons of Horus kind of black accents. The reason I do this is because the speed paint is so heavily pigmented that I can use it to create stripes and things like that, and then once I've got that in the cup, I just add a bit of ice yellow to turn it into a kind of like a greeny grey. So it works really easily, and it's just simple for me to kind of put together. So you can see here that we are creating quite a broad highlight, and to some extent this is intentional. You know, I want to show you that with a black tank that we probably need to go quite broad with it. We will make those highlights a lot tighter later on. But I think it's always worth remembering when you're highlighting these things that you're not highlighting them for your hobby lamp, you're highlighting them for gaming halls, and the lighting in gaming halls are just dreadful. You know, if you think about fluorescent lights in a school or whatever, they tend to be awful. So we have to take it beyond what we think is going to be reasonable in terms of these highlights. So yeah, keep it relatively broad. So what I did next was I just added some more ice yellow into the cup to make a brighter highlight, and you can see how bright that is. I think because I was just doing this as a one-off, and I was doing it as, you know, like a whole tank, I wouldn't usually paint a black tank for my Sons of Horus. You know, you might want to create a mixture of your own in the right ratios that are pre-prepared. But as this is just a one-off, I kind of just freehanded it until I was happy with the grey. But I think if you're going to do more than one tank, more than one unit, then you might want to get your kind of ratios fairly accurate. But I just kind of did it by sight and was like, yeah, I like that as a darker grey. Yeah, I like that as a lighter grey. So completely up to you. And I think it's about finding your own kind of your own feet with it. But you can see here, it's actually quite a prominent grey colour. Like it's you know, it's feels a bit Space Wolfy at the moment, or getting to be Space Wolfy, and it could make a great grey for Space Wolves as well. So we're going to use just straight up grim black now, and we're going to thin this just the tiniest little bit of thinner just to get it through the airbrush. And what you can see me doing, hitting it into the shadows, is just re-establishing those shadows so it becomes a black tank again. So the highlights are relatively tight, although you can still, you know, see the grey. But re-establishing those highlights just makes all those kind of edges nice and sharp, but also brings back some of the black elements to it as well. And you can see why I've used that grim black speed paint kind of to mix with ice yellow. It's, yeah, because of this process I just go back in and just add it. And the speed paint, of course, because of the nature of speed paints, they're slightly translucent, so it's kind of perfect for this job because it's like acting as a filter. So where you're hitting incidentally like the greys in the mid-tones, it will just kind of like fade that out really nicely. So now you're starting to get more of a black tank. As for kind of like where I'd use this, I would happily use this with Dark Angels. I'd even probably use this with Raven Guard as well, another kind of Raven Guard scheme, although I might give it kind of like a blue filter all over if I was to do Raven Guard. Right, we're going to use ice yellow and matte black, not speed paint this time, because we want our paint to be quite thick, because we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing, a bit of edge highlighting. And I've used a makeup brush here, and I've used a makeup brush because they're long haired and they're really soft, so they're perfect for this kind of job, just picking out the edges of my tank. So I'm not having to edge highlight an entire tank, which will take so long and it will be absolute agony, but also would be covered up a lot by battle damage. So this is just a job that takes less than a minute, just doing it with a makeup brush like this, nice and soft. First time I used this one, there's nothing like using a fresh makeup brush for dry brushing. Yeah, it just picks out all those edges, and I would do this again with the green when I get to the green a little bit later. You know, on the plastic the edges are quite sharp, but I did find that there were some bits where the glue wasn't perfect and it picked up on the glue, so I went back and kind of corrected those bits a little bit later. You don't see that on camera, but I went back and corrected it where there was a bit of excess glue that I'd used when building the Sakaran chassis, and it just looked a bit unsightly. Right, Scarab green plus Regal blue. You're going to use 3 parts Scarab green to 1 part Regal blue. I basically, like some mad professor, I was experimenting with the colours until I was happy to get the Sons of Horus, kind of like a Sons of Horus colour that I was happy with. So I've done all the experimentation for you, so you don't need to. But it's those 2 colours mixed together, 1 part Regal blue, 3 parts Scarab green, to make the perfect base layer for your Sons of Horus. And then the other thing I would say is you don't need multiple coats of this. Like you can just do 1 or 2 thin coats. And because these colours are so opaque, like, it's fairly quick. Then we're going to use Pharoah Guard Green and Eternal Hunt. We're going to mix those 2 together in a 50-50 ratio. And I'm going to add that in to the cup where I was just using Regal Blue and Scarab Green to get like a nice soft transition between the 2. And I just mix that all together in the cup. I didn't wash out the cup; it's just all together. And the reason I've done that is that it's going to create a sick fade between the 2 colours, because then I'm going to use that Eternal Hunt and Pharoah Green mix in a second as my kind of like my almost my third highlight. It's really important, I think, with the Sons of Horus Green, we get this bit right, because it's going to be the bit that really kind of stands proud on the tank. You know, it's this bit, the accent color, that's really going to pop against the black of the tank. The black's just almost going to like fade into the background. So a nice popping green, nice bright green. It's really, yeah, it's important that we get this bit right. And then, you know, whatever turret you use, highlight it appropriately. Yeah, I'm just considering the light, particularly on this turret, and the way in which, you know, light might fall on these elements. In terms of how I highlighted the Kratos, I tried to give you as much footage. Sorry, the Scarab. I tried to give you as much footage as possible. But if you are interested in knowing exactly why I highlight it in that way, I suggest you come on one of my Kratos courses. So we're going to use Eternal Hunt and Pharoah Green now. Sorry, Pharoah Guard. And then you can see how bright this is. This is, you know, it wouldn't have been appropriate to use this mix against that first mix that we had. So you need something in the middle and then just highlight it with this. Now you could leave it like this if you want to. That's actually a really nice green to do your kind of like highlights with. But I will take it further in a second. But if you wanted to stop here, that would be great. You know, I'm aware that there's quite a lot of mixing to get to the what I'd consider as the perfect Sons of Horus green. But you know, if you want to take it a little bit further, you absolutely can do. And again, just considering the way in which we're highlighting, just keep the highlights a little bit tighter. What I will say is that will go back and correct and fade in all of these transitions a little bit later on. So if you go a bit overboard with anything, that's absolutely fine. We will correct it. There is nothing in painting that cannot be corrected. Certainly with an airbrush, it is usually super easy to correct these things. So I'm going to use their Verdigris effects paint now, and I'm not going to use it as a Verdigris paint. I'm going to use it as a highlight. And this makes for a really interesting, very, very kind of like bright top highlight. You just need to be mindful with it, and just be careful with it, and you just want to make sure that you keep the highlight a little bit tighter than that Eternal Hunt and Pharaoh guard color. But yeah, this is the secret sauce. This using a Verdigris paint as a highlight. Right, we're going to use green tone and purple tone. We're going to use green tone first, and then we're going to follow it by using some purple tone. And essentially, what I do is I just spray the green tone into the shadows, which I've done here, and then I spray the purple into the shadows. This bit here, you can see me shading it with purple, and all this does is, number one, it adds additional contrast into what we've just created. It blends the colors together. If we've got an unsightly blend that's not very smooth, it blends them together because these are obviously so thin. And then you can build this up in layers if you want to. If you are finding it's too thin and you're not really noticing a difference with one or two coats, you could add a bit of like one drop of Hive Dweller purple into the mix, or into that purple wash, and then this will get you, a seriously purple wash that will be really nice to put into the shadows of your model. But again, it's just about the contrast, and it just makes it pop. And having those extreme values makes the green pop even further, and that very, very light Verdigris color pop even further. So exactly the same as we did before. This is Eternal Hunt and Pharaoh Green. So this isn't a Verdigris colour, this one. This is Eternal Hunt mixed with Pharaoh Green, which is, I guess, would be our mid-tone. And again, I'm just dry brushing the edges, picking out the edges. I don't want to be spending my entire time, edge highlighting. So having some scratchy, dry brushed edges like this is perfect, especially because we're going to battle damage all these edges up a little bit later. But there'll be some places that we can still see it. So, just rendering these with a dry brush is really, really useful. And this just comes from a makeup kind of dry brush set. So you get loads of different ones, and it cost me £4 off Amazon. Some of them are worthless. Some of them just aren't very useful. But, if there are 10 brushes in a pack, you'll probably use like 8 of them, and they're relatively cheap to use, so I don't need to look after them that much. Often, once I've used one, I just bin it, because nothing is more perfect than the first time you use a makeup brush, especially when you're edge highlight or dry brushing the edges of tanks. And you can see, be very, very careful when taking off the masking tape. One thing I would say is, before I masked this up, I did use a gloss varnish over it just to protect everything. Which I should have mentioned before, but you can see that it's shiny. So, and if you've seen any of my videos before, you'll know how integral gloss varnish is to locking in kind of every part of it. If you need to tighten up or tidy up any stripes that you've done, then you can do this at this process now. And then we're going to use micro set, and we're going to use micro sol to then do our transfers. So I've done a whole video on using decals, which I would go back. I would highly recommend. But basically, the short version is we use number 1 micro set, which is the blue one, over a gloss varnish surface. I'm not going to get into arguments with people about why I would gloss varnish the surface. Just go back and watch the original video about why I do it. And then we place down the micro set. We just wet that area over the gloss varnish, and then we lay down our transfer. Now, I'd really recommend, in terms of kind of using your transfers and getting them off the sticky back that they are on, you just do it on a Tupperware container with 1 sheet of kitchen roll, so you're not fishing around in a bowl of water for your transfer, and then lift it off. It will still be slightly sticky on the back. It will still have some of the glue on the back as well, which is mega useful. So, if you put it in a whole bowl of water, it will obviously take the glue off. But you're doing it this way, it helps us to keep the glue on.
and then we go around dotting on the micro set and then laying the transfer underneath over the top, and then I would, if I were you, make tiny corrections with a scalpel. You saw that Sons of Horus eye; it wouldn't come off straight away with a scalpel, so you had to kind of like lift it off and use a brush. But 9 times out of 10, I would use a scalpel to help me with this. And then next, we're going to use Microsol dipped or cotton wool bud dipped in Microsol, and then just roll it over the transfer to get rid of any air bubbles, and that's enough. The Sakaran is really straightforward because there's no curved surfaces on it, or very few curved surfaces. So, matte black, bootstrap brown, and angelic red. We're going to mix those together in a 1:1:1 ratio to create a nice kind of like dark reddish brown. And then we're just going to paint these, paint the tracks in this color. This is also, though, the color that we are going to be using for our chipping as well. I quite like this color. Yeah, after I made it up, I was like, oh yeah, actually, we'll use this as a chipping color. I've used lots of mixes here. Like, they do have kind of like equivalent paints, but for me as a painter, commission painter predominantly, it's always important to see what these mixes make. And these videos are a great opportunity to see what mixes make. And you know, I'm mixing them so you don't have to, so you see the end results. Is kind of the way that I see it. You know, it would be great if they had this exact tone of Sons of Horus green, but I have a tone in my head that I'm trying to match. So I'm playing around with these colors, you know. So, and I have a tone of brown that I have in my head. So I'm playing around and mixing these colors together to get the perfect tone and then to translate that onto a model. So I suppose I'm trying to save you the time and effort by doing all these wacky mixes. But you could use, just if you wanted to, bootstrap brown mixed in with a bit of black. You know, whatever it is. But you know, so this is why I'm choosing kind of unusual, adding angelic red into a brown, which you probably wouldn't see usually. But I just have a certain image of the brown I want for the chipping and the brown I wanted for the tracks as well. In terms of the tracks, I paint them brown because there are very few tracks in real life that are pure silver. There's a couple of Russian tanks that have kind of pure silver tracks, but most of them do not, and most of them are just kind of like a hybrid metal rubber mix. So painting them kind of like this way helps us keep the tank realistic. I gloss varnished the whole model after I did all the chipping and after all the transfers were dry, and then I'm going to use an oil wash. You could just use a like a dark tone wash if you wanted to here, but I much prefer kind of like the look of the oils just to fit my existing army, but also to fit that whole Heresy aesthetic. And using oils, it's just a thing I would do on most models. Like, it's pretty rare that I would not use oils on a model. So yeah, if you've seen my work before, I use oils. They're fairly simple. I've done lots of videos about it before, but essentially we gloss varnish the surface to protect everything, but also it helps with the flow of the oils. I mixed in 1 part lamp black to 2 parts burnt umber, and mix that with a little bit of white spirit until we got something that looked like the consistency, maybe just slightly thicker than milk. And then I pin wash the entire model. So I'm not, in this instance, I'm not slapping the oils all over the model. I'm pin washing quite precisely because I still want to maintain all the cool colors that I've created. And then once you've done that, you can matte varnish your tank, and once that's all tidied up, you can matte varnish your tank. And I would tidy that up usually with a clean cotton wool bud, and then we are creating our silver mix. Now I wanted quite a dark silver, so I've used here gunmetal, and then unusually a speed paint, which is polished silver. And I've simply done that to help the flow. So rather than adding water into the mix and diluting the water, I've just added a couple of drops of polished silver speed paint in, and then that will just help the flow of the paint. It will just get it moving. We've all experienced kind of like metallics where they are quite thick by natures of the metallic, but if you just add a little bit of silver speed paint in, it will get it moving quite quickly. And then because I want it to be quite a dark color as a base color, I've just added in a little bit of matte black paint, and then this will also help as a base layer, having slightly matte metallics in the shadows is a good trick for kind of your base metallics, and also it just helps it cling to the model more easily, and means you won't have to do multiple coats of a metallic. So yeah, if you add browns into gold, that's another kind of like good trick here. But as you can see, I've cleaned up the model from when we had used oils, and then I've given it a matte spray, Army Painter's matte spray, all over, which is a really nice kind of like tone of a matte spray through the airbrush. And then if you use an airbrush, you're much less, you're more likely to go wrong with using an airbrush matte spray than say a rattle can matte spray, especially if you're in a more humid part of the world. So next up, I hadn't used this one before, and I wanted to give it a go because I quite like the tone. It was kind of like this purplish, brownish, blackish thing going on. It was for dark skin shade as a wash for metals. I was like, is this going to work? And I thought it did work. I thought it kind of gave like an oily, slick metal look to the metallics, which I really, really liked. So we'll be using and experimenting with that a little bit more. Dark skin shade on metallics. Who would have thought? Right, next up, the gold. So again, I have a certain image of the golds in my head, and what type of gold that I want for my Sons of Horus. I've got a very specific image, basically like a greeny gold color, a corrupted gold color. And so I played around with some of the metallics in order to get there. So this is a 1-to-1-to-1 mix of rough iron, bright gold, and death metal. And then it's this lovely, really nice kind of dark gold, corrupted brass. I don't know what you'd call it, kind of color, but whatever it is really, really nice. So that's death metal, bright gold, and rough iron kind of mixed together. So the metallic range from Fnatic is limited, but you are totally capable of mixing some of those colors together and then coming up with your own mixes. But I just think the integral thing and the important thing is that you record what those mixes are and you write them down. Be it you write them down on your own Instagram page, or you write them down in notes on your phone, or you have a notepad and pen. It's really important to note these things down because, if I didn't have a video tracking what I did here, I would totally forget what mixes I'm kind of like wildly kind of creating. Right, this is bright gold, then mixed with death metal. And this is great. Mixing it with a bit of kind of greenish death metal kind of creates like a greeny gold, which looks awesome as like a mid-tone highlight. It looks really, really nice. Coverage is really good. And I'm just roughly highlighting all of the metallics that I've just done. And again, like we've got quite a battered tank. You can see there it's got kind of streaks going down it. It's got quite a lot of battle damage. The transfers are all damaged up. This is a bit of a battered tank that's seen war. So we can do this all very, very roughly. So that previous mix that we used, so bright gold mixed with death metal, what I'm doing now is mixing in a color, which is Tainted Gold. And then that will be our kind of final highlight for this element of the kind of metallics. And again, I'm just keeping the highlight a little bit tighter, but I'm keeping it quite broad. And I'm not doing any edge highlights at this point. In fact, I will just dry, but you'll see later, I'll just dry brush it a little bit later on. But just keep these highlights tighter than the previous one. But again, really, really important that you keep a track of everything in terms of the metallics. So rough iron, true copper. I mix these two together. Remember, rough iron is a really, really powerful paint. So you want a little bit of rough iron to quite a lot of true copper. I'd probably say 1 part rough iron to 3 parts true copper. But the true copper color is a lush color. Like, it's really worth getting. Coverage is really, really good, and it's great for a copper color. So those two, if you're looking to mix up your coppers and want a simple copper recipe, these two are fantastic. What I've done is just mix those two together to give me a darker tone, and then I'll roughly highlight it with true copper, and then that will be the coppers done. There's not a lot of coppers on here, but I would tend to use it for wires and things that conduct. I've used it quite decadently for the pipes as well, because there's good places to put verdigris. So yeah, and I don't need to worry about this because I am going to cover it in verdigris later on. So these can be super rough. We are using some mithril silver here, and then we are just giving it a dry brush, and then for the gold elements, I washed it in that dark skin shade, and then I will just dry brush it with this silver as well. You don't have to do that. You could dry brush it in Tainted Gold, but because I just had the silver out, and I almost wanted the effect that like these gold metals have been scratched, and in a war-torn conflict, I wanted quite prominent, scratchy kind of dry brush highlights. So just go around and dry brush all the metallics on your tank. I haven't shown you the main body of the tank here, of course. You can just get the drift from the turret. Dark rust, brilliant, quick drying because it's an acrylic paint, rust paint, and all you need to do here is just mix it with a little bit of airbrush thinner, and then you can put this all over your tank, or all over the metal parts. But you can also put this on your tank as well, on things like rivets and things like that. So if you want a particular rusty rivet, being quite precise with this, you can go over it and use it as a wash over kind of like rivets and things if you want kind of other areas. For the purposes of this video, I've just put it on the metallics, and then this will be quite a nice kind of like rusty effect, and it just adds a bit more interest to the metallics as well. One of the things is that just the dry brush silver can look a little bit boring, so mixing in a little bit of rust just makes it more interesting. And they're traitors, right? I always kind of assume that the traitors have kind of left their equipment to rust in a way that perhaps loyalists wouldn't. So it just adds a bit of flavour to the overall model. In fact, you can see me there using a little bit of rust on some black areas as well. Back to the coppers. So you don't need to spend too much time on the copper elements because, as I said, you're going to douse it in verdigris a little bit later. So don't worry about it. And then for anything that conducts, I would usually use a copper. That's a great trick from Matt Kane. If you don't follow Matt Kane, he does some amazing work. So so anything that conducts electricity or conducts power in any way, shape or form, Volkite's a really good example of that. Try and do it in a copper colour and then use your verdigris. So Deep Azure and Night Sky mixed together to give me my base of my copper, and I'm really going to go to town on this verdigris effect here. I want this like it's an ancient STC piece of war gear that's aged over time. The silvers have gone rusty, the copper elements have kind of got verdigris over them, and skeleton bones. So we're going to create a dust effect along the bottom of our tank here. This is for the brave of heart. Don't do this if you aren't brave. You might just be happy with it, or you might use some weathering powders, whatever. I've done it with an airbrush because I don't want the weathering powders to be removed. And along the bottom of the tank, because I'm going to use some dusty weathering powders later on, I've used skeleton bone. I think on reflection, I should have used charbone against the black, which would have been a little bit softer. But I usually use this colour, skeleton bone, on my green vehicles, so I just assumed that it will be okay on my black vehicles. But I actually think I should have used charbone, so use something slightly darker. But this is just an easy way to not faff around with like weathering powders at the bottom. And then in terms of the final bits, I just painted up the eye lenses. I then just added some weathering powders to the tracks, and I dry brushed the tracks first, and then added some weathering powders to them. And then just did some kind of like heat bloom effects as well, and then put it all together, and that's the tank done. I haven't shown you every single step, but I've definitely shown you all the broad brush strokes. If you want to know, how to do all those specific bits about, doing heat blooms, etc., I've got loads of videos already on my YouTube channel that we were checking out. But the other thing you can do is buy a ticket to one of my Kratos courses. I've got one ticket left for my UK Kratos course, and I'm going to Helsinki in August, where I've got 1 or 2 tickets
tickets left for that one as well. And I have just returned from America this month as well after doing a big Kratos course there, which will be held again next year. So if you want to come to that, then get in contact and we will get those tickets sorted out as well. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been useful for you. And as ever, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment down below. Take care and see you on the next one.